When success feels empty. There is a kind of success that looks impressive on the outside but feels hollow on the inside. It comes with goals achieved, packed calendars, and social recognition, yet also with a quiet exhaustion no one sees. Maybe you're living exactly that, functioning well but feeling very little. And then an uncomfortable question arises, almost like a whisper from the soul. Is this all there is? We were taught to run, produce, deliver, perform. We believed that if we did everything right, fulfillment would show up as a reward. But what if the problem isn't a lack of effort, but too much effort aimed in the wrong direction? What if true failure isn't making mistakes, but living an entire life without inner alignment? This is the paradox The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey forces us to confront. This is not a book about productivity in the shallow sense of the word. It's a map of human maturity, a philosophy of character applied to modern life. Covey doesn't just ask what you do, he asks who you are while you're doing it. And that shift in focus changes everything. Success stops being about appearances and becomes about coherence. Throughout this video we won't talk about shortcuts, hacks, or magic formulas. We'll talk about inner growth, quiet discipline, and conscious choices made when no one is watching. We'll explore how true effectiveness is born from the inside out, from identity to action, from character to results. If you feel that you've already achieved things but are still searching for a meaningful life, if you sense you're tired of living on autopilot, then maybe this isn't just another video to watch. Maybe it's an invitation. An invitation to reorganize your life around what truly matters with more awareness, presence, and practical wisdom. The invisible void. Why being effective isn't the same as being successful. Sometimes I watch people who are extremely competent, full schedules, goals met, visible results, and yet there's a strange silence in their eyes. It's as if everything is working on the outside, but life is missing on the inside. This is the invisible void of modern life. We do a lot, we achieve plenty, but rarely stop to feel whether any of it actually makes sense. And this is exactly where the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People begins, not by talking about success but about awareness. For a long time, we were taught that success means speed, accumulation, and external validation. The more you deliver, the more valuable you are. The busier you look, the more important you seem. But there's a subtle trap here. Effectiveness without purpose leads to soul-level burnout. It's possible to climb the entire ladder and only realize at the top that it was leaning against the wrong wall. Covey doesn't write for unproductive people. He writes for those who have already done a lot and have begun to ask, is this really it? I've lived through seasons like that myself. Full days, a crowded mind, and a strange sense of always chasing something that never arrived. When I finally stopped, I realized I was being effective at tasks that weren't aligned with my inner growth, my life purpose, with what actually made me human. A philosophy of success that never speaks to the heart may generate results, but it rarely generates a meaningful life. Stephen Covey proposes a profound shift. Before thinking about techniques, think about character. Before thinking about performance, think about identity. He invites us to move away from the logic of, how can I do more? And into a far more uncomfortable question, who am I becoming while I do it? That shift changes everything. Because deep personal development doesn't start in the planner, it starts in the mirror. There is a huge difference between being busy and being whole. Many people live on autopilot, reacting to stimuli, deadlines, demands, and other people's expectations. In that state, effectiveness becomes nothing more than sophisticated survival. Covey reminds us that inner growth requires pause, reflection, and above all, the courage to face what's out of alignment. And yes, that hurts a little at first, but it's a pain that liberates. When I talk about an invisible void, I'm not talking about obvious depression or dramatic crises. I'm talking about that quiet exhaustion that shows up even when everything is going well. That Sunday night tightness in the chest with no clear reason. That sense of living a correct life but not a true one. That's where practical spirituality enters as a gentle call, almost a whisper. Something in you is asking for more presence. The most common mistake is trying to fill that void with more productivity, more courses, more goals. But the void isn't a lack of doing, it's a lack of meaning. Covey shows us that conscious habits don't exist just to organize external life, but to restore internal coherence between values, decisions, and actions. Without that, any efficiency becomes nothing more than an elegant form of escape. Maybe you recognize yourself here. Maybe you're disciplined, responsible, intelligent, and still feel that something is off. There's nothing wrong with you. Quite the opposite. That discomfort may be the beginning of personal transformation. Because the right kind of discomfort doesn't come to destroy, it comes to wake you up. Self-awareness isn't a philosophical luxury, it's a practical necessity. Without it, emotional intelligence stays shallow, emotional maturity can't sustain itself, and inner leadership never truly develops. Covey is clear: there is no consistent external victory without an internal one. Everything starts within, and it always starts with a choice. And maybe the most important question at this stage isn't, how can I be more effective? But something far simpler and more powerful. What in my life is working, but isn't fulfilling me? Because when that question is asked honestly, something begins to move, and that's exactly where we step into the next phase of this journey, the awakening of inner freedom. From autopilot to awareness, the awakening of proactivity. For a long time, I believed that reacting well to circumstances was enough maturity. If something went wrong, I tried to handle it as best I could. If someone provoked me, I took a deep breath and moved on. But Stephen Covey draws a much deeper, almost spiritual, distinction between reacting and choosing. Being proactive isn't just acting first. It's living from a stable inner center, where my decisions aren't hijacked by my mood or by other people's behavior. The greatest human prison isn't external, it's internal. We react out of habit, conditioning, fear, old impulses we barely notice anymore. Covey invites us to something radical, taking full responsibility for our lives. Not as blame but as power. Responsibility here isn't a burden, it's freedom. When I realize I can choose my response, even when I can't choose the circumstances, something inside me aligns. There's a quiet bridge here to depth psychology. Viktor Frankl said that between stimulus and response there is a space, and in that space lives our freedom. Covey expands this idea and turns it into daily practice. Proactivity is consciously occupying that space. It's pausing before replying to an aggressive email. It's breathing before arguing. It's asking yourself, which version of me do I want to bring into the world right now? In everyday life, this changes everything. A reactive person starts the day already emotionally behind, chasing what others impose. A proactive person starts the day aligned with their values, even if the world is chaotic. That's self-mastery in practice. Not rigid control but presence. Choosing to act from what strengthens your inner growth, not from what drains your energy. I see this clearly in simple situations. Someone criticizes you unfairly. The automatic response is to defend, attack, or shut down. Proactivity asks something different. Is there anything here I can learn? Or, does this say more about them than about me? That shift in perspective requires emotional maturity, but it builds something rare today: inner dignity. Stephen Covey talks about the circle of concern and the circle of influence. Reactive people stay trapped in what they can't control: the economy, politics, other people's behavior. Proactive people invest energy in what they can influence: attitudes, choices, conscious habits. This simple shift creates a quiet but profound personal transformation. The more I focus on what depends on me, the stronger my inner core becomes. Proactivity is also practical spirituality. It's recognizing that I'm not just a product of my environment, my childhood, or my wounds. All of that exists, of course, but it doesn't define the end of the story. There is something in me, awareness, soul, presence, capable of responding with practical wisdom even in difficult situations. That's not naive, that's inner leadership. If you want to practice this today, start small. Observe your reactions for an entire day. Don't try to change everything. Just notice. Where do you feel on autopilot? Where do you hand your power over to external situations? Take a mental note. This simple exercise already builds self-awareness and emotional intelligence. Change begins with honest observation. Another powerful exercise: choose one area of your life where you often feel like a victim: work, family, relationships. Ask yourself courageously, what is under my control here? Even if it's just your posture, your tone of voice, or your decision not to fuel conflict, that's proactivity in action. Small repeated choices build a quiet inner discipline. Covey makes it clear that this habit isn't about forced positivity, but about internal coherence. Being proactive means aligning thought, emotion, and action. It's moving away from a mindset of emotional scarcity: I can't, I have no choice, it's not up to me, and into responsible abundance. And when that happens, something inside us gets ready for the next inevitable step of the journey. Because choosing consciously is powerful, but choosing where you're going changes everything. And that question now starts to echo almost inevitably: if I have inner freedom, what kind of life do I want to build with it? Living before doing, begin with the end in mind. There comes a quiet moment in life when the question stops being, what am I going to do? And becomes, who am I becoming while I do it? Stephen Covey calls this beginning with the end in mind, but at its core this is about identity. Before any action there is a vision, even if unconscious, of who we are and where we're headed. When that vision isn't clear, life turns into a string of disconnected tasks. Most people live as if they're improvising their own existence. They choose careers, relationships, and routines based on external expectations, fear of missing out, or sheer inertia. Covey invites us to do the opposite. Pause and design life before executing it. That isn't rigidity, it's awareness. Living without direction actually consumes more energy than living with a clear purpose. When I first heard the funeral speech exercise, I'll admit it felt strange. But there's deep wisdom there. What would you want people to say about you? That you were competent? Or that you were integral, present, human? This exercise isn't about death, it's about meaningful life. It reveals which values truly matter when the noise fades. Beginning with the end in mind is an act of practical spirituality. It means aligning daily decisions with higher principles, not momentary impulses. Covey distinguishes values from goals. Goals change, values endure. When we live guided by values, inner growth happens even on hard days. Without them, even achievements feel empty. In daily life this shows up simply. Before accepting a new project, ask whether it strengthens or weakens the person you want to become. Before engaging in an argument, ask whether that reaction brings you closer to or farther from your best self. These small filters create conscious habits and develop self-mastery without inner violence. I've noticed that many existential crises aren't caused by lack of ability, but lack of clarity. The mind gets tired because it's being used to run, not to choose. When we define a true north, energy organizes itself. Inner discipline stops feeling like effort and becomes a natural consequence of a well-defined identity. Stephen Covey talks about the first creation and the second creation. The first happens in the mind and heart, the second in the real world. When we skip the first, the second turns into chaos. When we honor the inner stage, external life gains coherence. That's deep personal development applied to reality. If you want to practice this today, try writing by hand slowly your 5 non-negotiable values. Not the ones that sound good, but the ones you actually live by. Then look at your weekly schedule. Does it reflect those values? This gentle but honest confrontation is a powerful tool for self-awareness and emotional maturity. Another simple exercise: choose one area of your life that feels confused and write a single intention sentence. Something like, I want to be a professional who, I want to be a parent who, I want to be someone who acts with. These sentences become quiet anchors. When pressure hits, they remind you who you decided to be. Beginning with the end in mind isn't about controlling the future. It's about honoring your essence. It's realizing that inner leadership begins when we stop living by reaction and start living by conviction. And when that conviction grows stronger, a new challenge inevitably appears. Because knowing who you want to be is liberating, but sustaining that in the middle of daily chaos requires difficult choices. And that's where the next quiet question emerges. What truly deserves your energy, your time, and your presence? The quiet power of priorities. Put first things first. There's a kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from too much effort, but from a lack of direction. It's the burnout that shows up even when you're getting everything done. Stephen Covey touches this nerve when he talks about putting first things first. Because at its core, this isn't about time management, it's about life management. Time follows priorities, and priorities reveal who we really are. The tyranny of urgency is ruthless. The phone buzzes, emails arrive, someone needs something, something has to be solved right now. And little by little, we postpone what's essential. Caring for our health, deepening relationships, studying, quieting the mind, strengthening the balance of body, mind, and spirit. Before we know it, we're too busy to live. Covey reminds us that what matters most rarely shouts, it whispers. I've noticed that what truly transforms us is almost never urgent. Reading a meaningful book, for example, doesn't feel urgent, but it shapes character. A book like Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl or Meditations by Marcus Aurelius doesn't change your day, it changes how you exist. The same is true for deep conversations, regular physical exercise, moments of introspection. These are quiet seeds. Putting first things first requires courage. Courage to say no to what drains your energy, even when it's disguised as opportunity. Saying no is an act of emotional maturity. It's not rejecting the world, it's respecting your mission. Every unconscious yes is a hidden no to a meaningful life. Discipline here isn't military rigidity, it's organized self-respect. It's waking up a little earlier to care for your body. It's blocking time on your calendar to study something that nourishes inner growth. It's choosing an honest conversation over another empty distraction. Covey reframes inner discipline as a daily commitment to what sustains your essence. In practice, this can start very simply. Take your calendar and schedule, before anything else, an appointment with yourself. It could be 20 minutes of reading, a mindful walk, prayer, meditation, or reflective writing. Treat it like any important meeting. Because it is. This small act builds conscious habits and strengthens inner leadership. There's also an emotional dimension to this habit. Many people stay busy to avoid feeling. Urgency becomes anesthesia. When we prioritize what matters, silence appears, and with it, unresolved emotions. Covey understands this and doesn't promise immediate comfort but clarity. And clarity, even when uncomfortable, always frees. I like to think of this habit as organizing the inner house. There's no point decorating if the structure is weak. Prioritizing means choosing what sustains your life in the long term, even if it requires adjustments now. It's trading momentary applause for lasting peace. It's turning effectiveness into practical wisdom. If you want to apply this today, try an honest exercise. Write down 3 things that, if done consistently, would deeply improve your life over the next 5 years. Now look at how much real time you devote to them each week. Don't judge, just observe. That contrast is often revealing and deeply transformative. When we start living from what's essential, something curious happens. Anxiety decreases, the mind clears, and relationships change. Because those who know what matters don't live competing all the time, they live aligning. And that alignment prepares the ground for an even deeper challenge. Because when you organize your life around values, an inevitable question arises: how do I live this in my relationships without losing myself or trying to defeat the other? The bridge between self and other, think win-win. There comes a moment in the human journey when we realize that winning alone isn't really winning. Stephen Covey calls this mental shift win-win thinking, but at its core, it's emotional maturity applied to relationships. Up to this point, we've worked on inner mastery. Now we're invited to cross the bridge between self and other, without losing ourselves and without trying to dominate. Most conflicts are born from a silent belief: if the other person wins, I lose. This scarcity mindset contaminates professional, romantic, and family relationships. Covey proposes something counterintuitive. True effectiveness emerges when we seek solutions where everyone's dignity is preserved. That's not naive, it's high-level emotional intelligence. Win-win isn't about giving in, it's about creating something new. I've seen many people confuse win-win with people-pleasing. That's not what this is. Pleasing comes from fear of rejection. Win-win comes from inner abundance. Only those who have built self-mastery, clarity of values, and inner leadership can think this way. When you know who you are, you don't need to crush the other to affirm yourself. In everyday life, this habit shows up in simple decisions. In a negotiation, for example, instead of asking, "How can I get the upper hand?" ask, "How can we build something sustainable?" In a relationship, instead of winning an argument, aim to preserve the bond. This transforms conflict into a space for inner growth, not an emotional battlefield. Stephen Covey reminds us that life is interdependent. We need one another to grow, create, and thrive. Thinking win-win means acknowledging this truth without losing your identity. It's saying, I matter, you matter, and the relationship matters. That triad sustains a meaningful life and creates a foundation for shared prosperity. There's also a deep spiritual layer here. When I see the other as an enemy, my heart closes. When I see them as a possible partner, something expands inside me. That shift doesn't happen through technique, but through character. That's why Covey insists so strongly on principles, not shortcuts. His philosophy of success is ethical before it is strategic. If you want to practice this today, start by observing your language. Notice how often you think or say, "That's not my problem, someone has to lose, there's not enough for everyone." These phrases reveal beliefs. Now try replacing them with questions. How can we solve this together? What would be fair for both of us? That alone initiates personal transformation. Another powerful exercise is reviewing your agreements, explicit and implicit, at work, in relationships, in family. Are they clear? Fair? Or is someone always giving more? Win-win requires empathetic communication and the courage to align expectations. Avoiding that alignment may feel comfortable, but it breeds silent resentment. Thinking win-win doesn't eliminate conflict, it elevates it. Instead of ego battles, value-driven dialogue emerges. Instead of winners and losers, creative solutions appear. This is how collective emotional maturity is built and how balance between body, mind, and spirit is strengthened in human relationships. And when this habit starts to take root, something shifts in the way we communicate. Speaking well is no longer enough. a genuine desire to understand arises. And that transition is subtle yet profound. Because after learning to seek the common good, an even more delicate question is born. Do I truly know how to listen to the other, or am I just waiting for my turn to speak? Listening is an act of love. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. There is a quiet loneliness that doesn't come from a lack of people, but from a lack of being heard. Stephen Covey touches one of the most sensitive points of the human experience when he says we must first seek to understand, and only then to be understood. It sounds simple, almost obvious. But in practice, it's one of the hardest habits to live. Because truly listening requires something rare: suspending the ego. Most people listen with the intention to reply, not to understand. While the other person is speaking, the mind is already forming arguments, defenses, corrections. That's not listening, it's waiting. Covey proposes empathic communication, where I temporarily step into the other person's inner world. Not to agree but to understand. This simple act carries a deep healing power. I see this clearly in everyday conflicts. Many arguments don't exist because of real disagreement, but because someone didn't feel seen. When a person is genuinely understood, something inside them relaxes. Tension drops. Defensiveness fades. Empathetic listening creates emotional safety, and safety is the foundation of any healthy relationship. This habit requires emotional maturity. Only someone with a solid inner identity can listen without losing themselves. Otherwise, any differing opinion feels like a threat. That's why Covey places this habit after the private victory. Empathetic communication isn't a social technique. It's the result of self-awareness and self-mastery. There is also a very deep spiritual dimension here. Listening to someone without judgment is an act of presence. It says without words, you matter. In a fast-paced world where everyone wants to be heard, offering true listening is offering dignity. This is practical spirituality applied to real life. In daily life, this habit can be trained consciously. In an important conversation, try not interrupting, not correcting, not finishing sentences. Just listen. Then repeat in your own words what you understood and ask, is that right? This simple gesture radically transforms the quality of empathetic communication. I've seen relationships restored because of this. Parents and children, couples, co-workers. Many wounds don't need long explanations, they need true listening. When the other person feels understood, the desire to be understood arises naturally. The order matters. Covey insists on this for a reason. Reversing it creates endless conflict. It's also important to talk about inner listening. Many people can't listen to others because they don't listen to themselves. They live in constant noise. Practices like reflective writing, meditation, or silent prayer help develop this capacity. Books like The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle can be powerful allies in this process of inner growth. If you want to practice this habit today, choose one person and run a simple experiment. During a conversation, focus 100% on them. Notice tone of voice, pauses, emotions beneath the words. Then observe how the conversation changes. This exercise develops emotional intelligence and deeply strengthens human bonds. When empathetic listening becomes a conscious habit, something curious happens. Conversations deepen, conflicts decrease, and cooperation arises more naturally. Little by little, we begin to realize that differences don't have to separate us. Because when two people truly listen to each other, something new is born between them. Something neither could create alone. And it's exactly this mystery that leads us to the next step of the journey, the quiet power of synergy. When the whole is greater than the parts, the power of synergy. There is a rare moment in human relationships when something almost magical happens. No one is trying to win, no one is defending themselves, and yet everyone grows. Stephen Covey calls this synergy. It's not forced agreement, nor a simple sum of opinions. It's creation. It's when two or more people meet from a place of emotional maturity and allow something new to emerge between them. Most of us were conditioned to see differences as threats. Someone who thinks differently feels like an obstacle. Covey invites us to reverse that logic. Differences are sources of strength. Where there is diversity of perspectives, there is potential for richer solutions. But this only happens when the ego is not at the center. Synergy requires humility and trust. I've been part of conversations where no one wanted to be right, everyone wanted to understand. In those moments, ideas flow, conflicts turn into learning, and the atmosphere changes. This doesn't happen by accident. It's the direct result of the previous habits: proactivity, clarity of values, inner discipline, an abundance mindset, and empathetic communication. Synergy is the natural fruit of that inner construction. There is a deeply spiritual dimension to this habit. When we let go of the need for control, something greater can act through us. It's like an orchestra. Each instrument is different, but when tuned together, they produce something none could create alone. This is the true balance of body, mind, and spirit applied to human relationships. In everyday life, synergy can be practiced consciously. In meetings, for example, instead of defending your idea from the start, try listening to every perspective first. Ask genuine questions. Build on what others say. This posture develops inner leadership and transforms competitive environments into spaces of creation. Synergy doesn't mean the absence of conflict. On the contrary, it requires healthy confrontation of ideas without personal attacks. It's saying, I disagree with you, but I respect who you are. This stance is only possible with emotional maturity and inner security. Without them, conflict becomes a power struggle. With them, it becomes learning. Stephen Covey makes it clear that conscious interdependence is a higher level of human development. Dependence is weakness. Independence is strength. Interdependence is practical wisdom. It's recognizing that we are more effective together than alone, not out of necessity but out of conscious choice. If you want to practice this habit today, observe your environments. Where do people compete for space? Where are ideas dismissed too quickly? Now try being the one who builds bridges. Value different contributions. Give credit. Encourage collaboration. Small actions can change the culture of a group. There is also an internal synergy that's often forgotten. When thought, emotion, and action move in alignment, a person becomes whole. That coherence generates a presence that naturally inspires. It's not forced charisma, it's lived integrity. This is personal transformation at its most subtle level. When synergy becomes part of life, we realize that growth isn't about competing but cooperating. And interestingly, the more we open ourselves to the collective, the more we must care for ourselves. Because creating together requires energy, clarity, and presence. And that inevitably leads us to the next question. How do we stay whole, balanced, and renewed along the way? The art of not losing yourself. Sharpen the saw. There is an exhaustion that vacations don't fix. A fatigue that isn't just physical or mental, it's soul deep. Stephen Covey touches this point with great sensitivity when he talks about sharpening the saw. He reminds us that we are not machines built to produce results, but whole human beings. And when we neglect that wholeness, life begins to lose its color, even when everything seems to be working. Sharpening the saw means caring for 4 inseparable dimensions: body, mind, heart, and spirit. Ignoring any one of them creates imbalance. Caring only for the body while neglecting the mind leads to emptiness. Developing the mind while ignoring the heart leads to coldness. Seeking spirituality without grounding in the body leads to escape. Covey proposes something rare today: balance of body, mind, and spirit as a daily practice, not a pretty speech. I've lived through seasons where it felt like there was no time for me. Everything was a priority, except what was essential. And that's when I noticed a curious paradox. The less I took care of myself, the less effective I became. Renewal isn't a waste of time, it's a source of clarity. A rested mind makes better decisions. A cared for body sustains more energy. A listened to heart prevents self-destructive choices. On the physical level, sharpening the saw can be both simple and profound. Walking regularly, sleeping well, drinking water, respecting limits. None of this is revolutionary, but it becomes transformative when done with awareness. The body is the first temple of inner discipline. Ignoring it comes with a quiet cost. On the mental level, Covey speaks about continuous learning. Reading not just for information but for formation. Books like The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, or Man's Search for Meaning nourish not only the intellect but character. The mind needs elevated ideas so it doesn't get lost in trivialities. The heart may be the most neglected dimension. This is where emotional intelligence comes in. Sharpening the emotional instrument means learning to name feelings, set boundaries, forgive when possible, and step away when necessary. Ignored emotions don't disappear. They show up as anxiety, irritability, and burnout. Emotional maturity is constant inner listening. And then we arrive at the spirit, often confused with religion but really about connection to meaning. Practical spirituality means creating spaces for silence, contemplation, and gratitude. It can be prayer, meditation, reflective writing, or simply being present in nature. The spirit needs silence the way the body needs rest. Covey is clear: renewal is not an event, it's a process. It's not enough to take care of yourself once a year. Sharpening the saw is an ongoing commitment. Small daily rituals sustain long journeys. 10 minutes of silence a day is worth more than a week of escape after collapse. If you want to apply this today, start with a simple, honest question. Which dimension of my life is asking for care right now? Don't try to fix everything. Choose one. Maybe it's sleeping better. Maybe it's returning to reading. Maybe it's sitting with yourself without distractions. One conscious adjustment begins a quiet personal transformation. There is also an ethical dimension to this habit. When you renew yourself, you're not doing it only for you. Balanced people become safe environments. They listen better, decide more clearly, and relate with greater presence. Self-care is an act of collective responsibility, a mature form of inner leadership. When we sharpen the saw, life takes on a different rhythm. Not because problems disappear, but because we are more whole as we move through them. And at this point in the journey, something begins to reveal itself clearly. Because after integrating action, relationship, and renewal, a larger question inevitably arises. What kind of life is born when effectiveness stops being performance and becomes wisdom? From effectiveness to wisdom, a life worth living. After walking this inner and relational journey proposed by the 7 habits of highly effective people, one thing becomes clear to me. Effectiveness isn't about doing more, it's about living better. Stephen Covey was never interested only in productivity. He was speaking about an aligned life, where thought, emotion, and action move in the same direction. When that happens, something rare emerges, inner peace with external results. True effectiveness is born from character. Not charisma. Not performance. Not image. Truly effective people, in the deepest sense, are those we can trust. They say what they do and do what they say. This coherence creates a quiet authority that doesn't need to impose itself. It's inner leadership lived, not announced. I notice that many people chase success as if it were a destination, when in fact it's a reflection. A reflection of conscious habits, repeated choices, and values honored in the details. When life is built this way, success stops being a mask and becomes a natural consequence of genuine personal transformation. Covey leads us from dependence to independence and, finally, to conscious interdependence. This is human maturity in its most beautiful form. First, we learn to take care of ourselves. Then, to relate with dignity. Finally, to contribute to something larger than ourselves. This progression gives meaning to effort and depth to existence. An effective life in this context is a meaningful life. Not because everything is perfect, but because there is clarity. Clarity about who we are, what matters, and how we want to be in the world. This clarity reduces inner conflict, strengthens emotional intelligence, and leads to more ethical choices, even when no one is watching. There is also a serenity born from this integration. When body, mind, heart, and spirit are tuned, life finds rhythm. Decisions are no longer reactive. Relationships become more honest. Work stops being an escape and becomes an expression. This is the balance of body, mind, and spirit applied to everyday reality. I like to think of practical wisdom as effectiveness with a soul. Acting competently without betraying values. Growing without running over others. Prosperity without inner poverty. Covey reminds us that the most important legacy isn't what we leave in the world, but what we leave in people. When you look at your own path, you may realize you've already achieved more than you imagined. But the deeper question isn't, what have I accomplished? It's, who have I become in the process? That question changes everything. It shifts the focus from comparison to coherence, from anxiety to presence. At this stage of the journey, it's no longer about learning new habits, but about living from them. Letting wisdom show up in small daily choices. How you listen, decide, care for yourself, and treat others. This is where Covey's philosophy of success becomes embodied life. And maybe this is exactly the moment when all of this needs to take concrete form. Not as concept, but as lived experience. Because ideas do transform, but stories transform even more. And in that space between understanding and action, one last question quietly arises. How do these habits show up when real life knocks on the door on an ordinary day with real challenges? When life tests the habits, a story of conscious choices. I want to tell you a simple story. Not grand, not heroic. An ordinary story, because that's exactly where personal transformation happens. Imagine an ordinary man. Let's call him Daniel. Daniel wakes up early every day, works hard, is responsible, meets deadlines. To everyone else he's effective. But inside, something isn't at peace. He feels that quiet void we talked about at the beginning, not sadness but misalignment. Life works, but it doesn't pulse. On an ordinary Monday, Daniel receives difficult news at work. An important project will be restructured and he may lose ground. His immediate impulse is to complain, blame leadership, shut down. but something has shifted inside him. He remembers, perhaps for the first time consciously, that between stimulus and response there is a space. And in that space he breathes. He chooses to be proactive. Instead of reacting, Daniel decides to talk. He asks himself, what kind of person do I want to be in this moment? He begins with the end in mind. He doesn't want to be remembered as bitter, but as someone with integrity. So he speaks with clarity, without aggression and without submission. He tells the truth with respect. Something changes in the atmosphere. In the days that follow, the routine tightens. More demands, less time. Daniel feels the temptation to abandon what's essential. But for the first time he puts first things first. He wakes up 30 minutes earlier to walk in silence. He returns to a book that makes him think. The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. He doesn't read out of obligation, but out of inner need. At home, conflicts arise. Old patterns resurface. Before, he would have tried to win the argument. Now he chooses win-win. He listens. Truly. Not to respond, but to understand. He realizes he doesn't have to lose for the other to win. And, surprisingly, the conversation ends better than any argument ever could. In a tense meeting, Daniel notices something new in himself. He doesn't try to impose ideas. He builds together. He values differences. Synergy emerges. The group creates something better than any individual solution. He realizes, almost with surprise, that effectiveness with wisdom generates natural respect. Not fear, not competition. But the biggest change happens in a quiet moment. On a Saturday afternoon, Daniel notices the deep exhaustion he had ignored for years. For the first time, he doesn't run from it. He stops. He cares for his body, his mind, his heart, and his spirit. Without guilt. He understands that sharpening the saw isn't a luxury, it's conscious survival. Over time, Daniel's life doesn't become perfect. Problems still exist. But something essential changes. He changes. There is coherence. There is presence. There is enough peace to face chaos without losing himself. He becomes whole, not just efficient. And this is where the story meets you. Because maybe your name isn't Daniel. Maybe your routine is different. But the challenges are similar. The question isn't whether you know these habits. It's whether you're willing to live them. One by one. In everyday life. When no one is watching. So I ask you, calmly and honestly. Where are you still reacting when you could be choosing? What essential thing are you postponing in your meaningful life? Which relationship in your life needs more listening and less ego? Which part of you is asking for care right now? Personal transformation doesn't happen in a big event. It happens in the next choice. In the next conscious no. In the next true act of listening. In the next moment of silence. If this video touched something in you, don't let it remain just a passing inspiration. Apply it. Experiment. Live these teachings. Because deep personal development isn't about knowing more, it's about living better. And if you want to continue this journey of inner growth, life purpose, practical spirituality, and wisdom applied to real life, subscribe to the channel The Philosophy of Awareness and the Soul. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next encounters. They may not change the entire world, but they can profoundly change your inner world.